Both say the other did the actual killing, and somebody's lying to somebody.
Let's talk about that night.
I won't talk about that.
As your friend, I want to help you die with dignity, and I don't see how you can do that unless you start to own up to the part you played in Walter and Hope's death.
And President Bill Clinton began his affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman. These allegations are false.
But Christine Bunch's life was far removed from Hollywood or the White House. She was a teenager just trying to get by.
I was 17 and dating a very nice boy, I thought. And I ended up going to the doctor, and I told him that I'd had the flu for 4 months, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And he said, "The flu? That's pretty serious." And he said, "I think, we should probably check some other things out." And I was like, okay. And so he wanted to do a pregnancy test, and I said, "No, I'm on the pill. I've been on the pill for basically 5 years." And he said, "Yeah," he said, "that doesn't always mean that you're covered." And so I had no clue that that was true. And I discovered that I was 4 months pregnant with Tony. I think that was my big wake-up call. I went right back into the school and took my GED test and passed it. And I started working a couple jobs because I was getting ready to be a mom, and I wanted to be a different one than what I had.
And what about the boy?
Well, the boy, turns out he had several different girlfriends. And while our parents thought that we should absolutely get married and do the right thing because we were having a baby, I didn't feel like it was the right thing because I just couldn't promise that I was going to love him and he would be the only one for the rest of my life. I didn't feel that way about him. But I wanted him to be there and be part of Tony's life. And so he stuck around for a few weeks, and then he was gone and in the wind. And his parents continued to be there and support me and bring diapers and teddy bears.
It wasn't an easy life living in a small town as a teenage mom.
Greensburg's a little bitty town with not a lot of black people when I was there. So it has a little bit of a racist feel. Very country, I guess you would call it.
At age 45, Christine is a bright, articulate woman who remains scarred by the tragedy of June 30th, 1995. But the image of her son, Tony, remains vivid.
Happy, fearless, excited about everything. I mean, my childhood had spectacular moments, but it's so different when you see it through your own child's eyes and they get so happy and so moved by something that you take for granted. It opens up a whole new world for you. And I look back on it now and think, wow, because so many people have said different things through the years about the things that he knew about and how he talked. Well, he was around adults. I didn't have any other little kids, so he kind of talked like a little person. And he liked Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, and The Terminator was his favorite. And yes, he listened to big hair bands because that was my favorite, and that's what I played in the car and sang. And so he would tell you he liked Bon Jovi, and he played Nintendo with my brother, and he could dribble a basketball at 3 years old, and he already stood 3 feet tall, so I had dreams of him being in the NBA. He had no freckles. His lips were like mine, because most of the time people will say, "Oh, I love that lipstick you're wearing." And I'm like, no, I'm not wearing any. It's just some chapstick or some gloss. They're just always red, and his were always red, and just always had a big smile. It's just one of those things where things would just delight him, and it can be the smallest thing. For his birthday, I would always blow up balloons and tie them to the ceiling. And so for his first birthday, everybody said, "Oh, he's going to be so frightened, and he's going to be just terrified." And so I put him in the middle of the room and I let the balloons go and they fell down on him. And he threw up his little hands and threw his head back and just laughed. He thought it was the greatest thing ever. So I was like, that cost me $1 to get those balloons and put them up there. And for him, that was the best part of his birthday.
But her dreams for her son came crashing down as smoke filled the trailer she shared with Tony. Here's how she describes that day.
It happened early in the morning,
Okay.
I think around 6 o'clock.
Okay.
And I was still asleep. The night before had been just hectic. I mean, it was end of June. It was very hot. Tony was fussy and didn't really want to go to sleep. And so we ended up, reading stories and watching TV on the couch. And we fell asleep there. We were in front of the air conditioner that was in a window. When I woke up, it didn't immediately register that there was a fire. I remember thinking, it's foggy in here and I can't really see. And so I didn't understand how it got foggy inside the house. And so I sat up and I'm looking for him and I don't see him anywhere. And I look off into his bedroom and I see that it's even foggier in there. And I start to go in there and that's when I see flames. So I pick up a blanket and a pillow and I'm trying to cover them because you hear, smother. And those items basically just melted in my hands. It is not something you'll ever forget. It's not something you'll ever stop thinking about because the terror, the panic, everything just chokes you and weights you down and you're trying to figure out the right way to do something. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get into that door. So I ran out to the front of the trailer and I picked up his tricycle and I busted out the bedroom window and I tried to climb in. And Tom and another neighbor pulled me out and told me that I had to wait for the firemen to get there because the flames had shot through the roof. And I tried to go back in the front door because I wasn't going to leave him lost in there. I had to find him. And the firemen arrived and they put me in an ambulance and we waited. And so I'm thinking we're waiting and they're just going to bring him out and they're going to put him in there with me and we're going to go to the hospital and it's just going to be okay. And Tom got into the ambulance and I said, "Did you find him?" And he said, "Yeah, we found him." And at that moment, I was fine. It didn't occur to me that my greatest love wasn't still alive. I just knew that I couldn't find him and that they had found him and so everything was going to be okay. And it wasn't until my dad got to the emergency room and he's the one that told me that he was dead.
Firefighters working the scene quickly came to the conclusion that it was an arson case. One of the firefighters battling the blaze was Tom Minning.
All the fires are investigated to find a cause. So even the state fire marshal's office gets called in to help us find the cause. So we have chemical sniffer things you can put on the floor. We dig out. We see where you can always tell where a fire actually starts and burns out from. There's a lot of telltale signs of that, where the main heat's at, where, the charring of the wood, even light bulbs in the ceiling. Just a regular light bulb will melt towards where the fire came from. A lot of people don't know that. If you've never seen it, you wouldn't believe it.
Do you believe that it was a set fire?
I truly believe it was, but like I said, I wasn't inside the thing. I'm only going by what the people that were inside were saying and what the outcome the fire marshal came up with to say.
Sheriff deputies began a brutal interrogation of Christine.
I had some blisters on my nose. My cheeks were red. I had cuts on my feet and my hands where I was trying to get into the window, and I was running on glass and rocks. My hair was singed and smelled horrible, and so she helped me to wash and comb most of that out, because that's literally all you can smell. After that happens, that's all you taste. That's all you focus on. So she was trying to get rid of that for me, because that's all I kept saying is I can smell it and I can taste it and I can feel it still. Later on that evening, it was probably about 6 o'clock, I said I wanted to leave. I wanted to leave the hospital. And my mom said that wasn't a good idea. And I said, yes, I'm gonna go to Tom's, and I'm gonna go stay at Tom's, and I'm gonna sleep in Tony's bedroom, and I'm gonna get to smell him, and I'm gonna stay there. So they arranged to get me released, and I went to Tom's, and Tom put me right in Tony's bedroom, and I stayed there, and I wasn't sleeping. And about 11 o'clock at night, the sheriff's department called and said that they wanted me to come down to the station. So I got there at about 11:30. I was barefoot because I didn't have anything. All of my stuff had been destroyed, and I was wearing some borrowed clothes that somebody had loaned me. So I went in there barefoot. They put me in a little room, kind of like a little closet. So there was a desk and there was a chair at the desk, and I had an officer on one corner of the desk kind of blocking the door, and another officer on the other side of the desk, and then one behind me. And they started talking to me about insurance. I'm looking at them like, what kind of insurance? Because I honestly thought at that time I was in trouble because I didn't have insurance on my car. And no, they're talking about home insurance and life insurance. And I was like, I don't have insurance on my car because I can't afford it. No, I don't have insurance on the home. It wasn't mine. It was my mother's. No, I don't have life insurance on my child. He was only 3. Who is going to think something is going to happen like that and put out insurance? I was 21. It never occurred to me that anything could happen to my child. I still felt invincible. It never occurred to me anything could happen to me. So I was just very confused, and they started talking, well, there has to be some reason that you did this. And that was the first time that they've thrown it at me that I've done this. And I started screaming at them. I did nothing. I have nothing. I had nothing to gain. Why would you do that? And I remember just screaming at them. And my mom and Tom opened the door, and they said, you will never talk to her again. And we left. The next day, my dad came to pick me up. He was helping me so that I could get a funeral planned, because I'd never done that, and I didn't know what to do or how you go about doing those things. I didn't know. It was like walking through unknown territory, and I wasn't sure who you ask, who you talk to. So my dad came over to do that, and with my mom and him, we went to the funeral home, and I was told that you can recognize him and that I could put up pictures. And I just remember looking at him like he was speaking a different language. And I said, I don't have any pictures anymore. And my dad said, we've got pictures. We'll take care of pictures. We can do that.
Convinced that she could prove her innocence, Christine volunteered for a lie detector test.
The very next day, I was supposed to go for my polygraph. And so my dad drove over, and he and my stepmom took me for the polygraph. And I don't know how they do polygraphs. Mine just felt weird because I was in a room in a corner, virtually facing the corner, and he hooked the straps up around me and put the monitors on me, and then he was back over behind me with the equipment asking me questions. And so sometimes the questions would be just like I'm talking to you right now, and then the next time it would be loud, like he was right up in my ear, and I would jump and try to focus on what he was saying, because it was unnerving having somebody behind you that you couldn't see. And we went through the questions once, and then he turned everything off and told me that he knew without a doubt that I had done this, and it was important for me to confess what I had done. And I said, I don't know that I have done this, and I have nothing to confess. I don't know what you see on those machines, but no, I did not do this. And he said, obviously, he said, you are a sick and twisted bitch. And he said, I know that you did this. And I said, at this point, I said, I may be sick and twisted. If that's the case, get me a doctor, get me a lawyer, but get out of my face. You're not going to keep talking to me like that. And he said, I know that you did this. He said, I know. He said, everybody out there, it knows. And I said, but I don't know that I did this. I don't know. And that I don't know went all over the place. That was the headline the next day. When asked why she did this, she said, I don't know. That was when I realized I'm either going to have to fight or I'm going to lay down. I was arrested immediately. That was the headline in the next day's paper, that I had said, I don't know. None of the conversation that took place, just that. And I'm in the Decatur County Jail, waiting to see what happens. I've been charged with murder and arson. My family continued to come see me. They took photographs while I was waiting on visits from behind the two-way glass. So it looked like I was just staring off into space, not paying attention to anything, chewing gum, whatever. So you could paint this picture of I was so cold and so callous. You weren't telling people that you were searching my cell every day because you felt like I was suicidal. You didn't tell people that you were bringing Kleenexes into my visit because I couldn't stop crying. None of that ever came out.
Firefighters initially believed it was an arson because the flame burned in what has been called a pour pattern. In other words, it appeared someone had poured a flammable liquid on the floor and lit it on fire. A laboratory test conducted by the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms found trace levels of kerosene in the trailer's living room, but not in the bedroom where Tony was sleeping. During winters, Christine and the previous owner of the trailer used a kerosene space heater to supplement the furnace during the bitter Indiana winters. Christine's lawyer, Ron Safer, said the police used faulty science in determining that the fire was intentionally set, and he goes on to say that there may have been misconduct on the part of the ATF.
I have prosecuted arson cases. I know the science of arson investigation, and none of it was applied. So what went wrong was from the very early moments of this investigation, they brought in somebody who sprinkled fairy dust over the crime scene and said, this is an arson. everything that they said, everything was wrong. They point to V patterns, which is not necessarily a point of origin. They point to burn patterns on the floor showing that there was liquid, when burn patterns have been found to not prove that there was liquid. They pointed to burn down as evidence of an accelerant, when it is not evidence of an accelerant, it is evidence of ventilation. No, they were just wrong about everything that they said. And so, you pick up the testimony or the report of the so-called expert, and you realize, okay, they convicted her on the basis of this guy's testimony, and everything he said was wrong.
But even more troubling was an altered laboratory report from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The ATS report indicated after they'd tested a whole bunch of material that there was an unidentified type of accelerant that was used in a living room area, but also in Tony's bed. Now that's really important because there is an explanation for why that was present in the living room area, because there used to be a kerosene heater that was in the living room, but there would be no explanation for why there would be a different kind of accelerant material in Tony's bedroom. And that was damning evidence, because then it does appear that there is an accelerant that was used and that the fire was intentionally set. There were two problems with that. One was it wasn't an unidentified kind of liquid. When you subpoena the underlying test data, you see that what they tested against was kerosene. Well, once again, there was a kerosene heater, so it makes perfect sense if there's going to be kerosene in a living room area. And then perhaps more importantly, definitely more importantly, when you look at the underlying test data for Tony's bedroom, the sample was negative. It was not possible. It was negative. It is an unsolved mystery that the ATF agent's initial report, he reports the test results accurately, i.e. that there were living room samples in the area of the kerosene heater that tested positive, and that the sample in Tony's bedroom tested negative. He submitted that thanks to the local investigators, and sometime later issued an additional report, a different report, that said that the result in Tony's room was positive. Why that happened, how that happened, we will never know. By the time we got involved in the case, the ATF agent Kennard was incompetent. Just how or why the laboratory report was altered remains a mystery, but Safer isn't afraid to speculate.
Well, if I were to speculate, I would speculate that he sent the accurate report to the local investigators. They said, oh, can't have that because we know that she's guilty. We promise you she's guilty. And we need you to report that it's a positive report because we need two sources of origin. And he said, okay. But, I have no evidence to show that at all.
A jury heard the evidence and found Christine Bunch guilty of murder and arson. Her lack of emotion during the trial weighed heavy on some in the courtroom. Firefighter Tom Minning remembers it like this.
But what I will tell you was, in court, when I figured she would be distraught, she was not. That probably upset me more than anything is when she went into court, I didn't even see her shed a tear, and I was there. That's probably what upset me the worst as a parent.
But Christine says she was acting the way her public defender requested.
So, they told me this is how you need to look. This is the kind of thing you need to wear. Don't do a lot of makeup. Make sure that your hair isn't too big or too wild. And you can't be sitting over there sobbing like that. You've got to keep that under control. So we went into trial. I sat there. I didn't say anything. I made sure I didn't cry until I got in the vehicle to go home.
The jury found her guilty of arson and murder, and the judge sentenced her to 60 years in prison. She was pregnant the day she was sentenced.
At my sentencing, my judge took it upon himself to tell me, I see that you have managed to have yourself impregnated to get sympathy from this court. And I'm going to tell you that you'll never raise that child.
Folks, I have the most wonderful wife in the world. She is the kindest, gentlest human being I've ever met. She puts up with me. What more can I say? She's just a terrific human being. And she's a wonderful mother to our 3 daughters. But there's not a planning bone in her body. When we got married 15 years ago, she delegated all the planning to me. So I had to deal with the florist. I had to deal with tuxedo place. I had to deal with baker. I had to deal with the wedding venue. I dealt with all these things. And I also had to deal with the wedding registry. And I didn't know anything about any of those things. I so wish there had been a company like Zola out there to help me out. Zola is the wedding company that will do anything for love. They are reinventing the wedding planning and registry experience to make the happiest moment in couples' lives even happier. From engagement to wedding and decorating your first home, Zola is there, combining compassionate customer service with modern tools and technology, all in the service of love. It's free and easy to use, and it's sort of fun too. They've had over 300,000 couples use it so far. Zola Registry has everything you love about your favorite department store, plus things like honeymoon funds, fitness classes, wine subscriptions, and so much more. They have 500 top brands and 50,000 gifts, experiences, and cash funds. It's so easy to use for both the couples and their guests. And they have friendly customer service, and they go beyond what most places would ever do. You can personalize your registry with photos and notes about why you're coveting certain gifts. It's not just about the registry. Zola has a free suite of wedding planning tools, including free wedding websites. A couple Zola registry automatically integrates into your Zola wedding website so guests can seamlessly shop and get all the details they need in one place. Zola's other wedding planning tools include a customizable checklist and guest list manager. Zola's first suite of tools can be managed from Zola's wedding app for iPhone and Android. To sign up with Zola and receive a $50 credit towards your registry, go to zola.com/suspect. Again, ZOLA.com/suspect. One more time, folks, for a $50 credit towards your wedding registry, go to zola.com, ZOLA.com/suspect. Give me some of your impressions from reading the script and talking about this. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, every time I read, these scripts and just seeing these wrongful convictions, it feels as though there's always something being swept under the rug. And it makes me think there must be so many convictions out there that just don't have the full facts, or they do have the full facts, but those facts are being altered. And it's just unbelievable to me that, in this system, it feels like people are just, their lives are being completely ruined. And it seems like it's almost simply done. Other people have control, and they take that control, they take that power, and they just can destroy someone's life. And I don't know, it's another story of just something that seems that they could have just, with the kerosene and understanding about the kerosene space heater that she had, just that little detail, to have it be so brushed aside just seems very wrong and confusing.
Well, what's more perplexing to me is the original laboratory report said the kerosene was only found back in the living room where there wasn't a fire, where there just was smoke and stuff. But that was where Christine was sleeping, but there wasn't any kerosene found back in the bedroom. And somehow, like 2 weeks before trial, a revised report came out that said the kerosene was found both places. And I don't know how that happens. I mean, I really don't. I mean, the laboratory reports, what the laboratory report says, the attorney Ron Safer speculated that, maybe somebody in the laboratory changed the results to match what the police expectations were. I don't know if that's possible, if that could have happened, if that would have happened, but it sure does raise some huge question marks in my mind when you look at that and you say, what's going on here? And I can tell you this. Early on in my career, I covered the police departments for 2 years. And then I spent the bulk of my career as a journalist, the last 28 years or so, covering politics. And I can tell you, honestly, those first two, and we know how notorious politicians are for lying. And I don't know, maybe in Canada they're all squeaky clean, but down here in the States, it's a real issue. Our politicians, and and I live in perhaps the most corrupt state in the union, which is Illinois. I mean, we send our politicians to prison pretty regularly. But I've always told people, those 2 years I covered police departments in the Midwest, I was lied to more than the 28 years that I covered politicians all over the United States. It is such an endemic issue among so many people in law enforcement not to be truthful. Now, that doesn't mean, I say this with a caveat, I'm not talking about everybody that's in law enforcement. I'm not saying, that at all. But it is a real issue with how our legal system operates, how police officers are allowed to operate. It's the only place where I can think of where the United States Supreme Court has sanctioned a governmental entity that it's okay to lie to the citizens. Because police officers are allowed to lie during these police interrogations to try to get a confession. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, where else in the world do the courts say, yeah, it's okay for government officials to lie to the citizenry? That's the only place I can really come up with where that's really allowed. And that's really troubling and disturbing to me. I don't know, it just really is upsetting to me. So when I see these cases, my inclination is, I don't think that police officers often create evidence to frame innocent people. They create evidence to frame people who they think are guilty. But the problem is sometimes cops are wrong. And I don't know if that happened in this case or didn't happen in this case. I'm not saying one way or the other. But I've come across it enough times in my career where almost from the get-go, there's this tunnel vision that this person must have done something wrong here, and we're going to focus in on him or her and really go after him. And all other evidence is just kind of ignored.
Entering a prison is a difficult experience for anyone, but it is especially trying for a woman expecting a child.
It was very scary. You don't know what to expect. You walk in and your handcuffs and shackles are taken off, and all of your personal effects, whatever that is, stamps, envelopes, your toothbrush, is thrown out on the floor so they can go through it and make sure you aren't bringing anything into the prison that you shouldn't have. You're then given a little cup of lice shampoo and told to go strip. And you take a shower and you stand in there and freeze for 10 minutes because that lice stuff has to stay on you for 10 minutes. And then they tell you when you can rinse it off. And then you're given a blue uniform and you're escorted over to the classification dorm. So when I got there, everybody knew who I was because people had brought in newspaper articles about me and they had seen me on the news. So they knew that I was a baby killer, and they felt it was their job to treat me accordingly. My very first grievance was my first week in the intake dorm because the guard wouldn't let me out to go to the bathroom. So my roommate that I was in there with gave me a Kool-Aid jar that she'd gotten off commissary, And so I used that to go to the bathroom. And then the next morning, I passed out on the way to breakfast. And the day shift officer said, you're pregnant. Why aren't you eating? And I said, I have been eating. I had supper yesterday at 5:00. And she said, no, you're supposed to get a late night snack. And I said, well, who do I talk to about that? Who gives it to you? And she said, the officer. And I said, well, the officer didn't give me anything. She wouldn't even let me out to go to the bathroom. I said I had to use some jar. And that officer, her name was Miss Milton. She was supposed to be the meanest one there. She immediately took it upon herself to take me over to the infirmary. They got my blood sugar checked. She got me a medical card right then that I was supposed to have a snack and an extra meal or an extra milk with every meal. And she helped me file the grievance so that officer was kicked off of the dorm. And then she put a note up front that I was to get out to go to the bathroom whenever I asked. I was 6 months pregnant. She said, if there is an issue with this, you will call the shift control.
Childbirth is usually a time of extreme joy. For Christine, it was a time of happiness and trepidation.
The day he was born, they had kept me on the unit because I'd been up all night with a backache. And with Tony, I didn't go into regular labor. They induced me and then discovered that I couldn't give birth naturally, and they had done an emergency C-section. So I didn't realize that back pains could be labor. And my back hurt so bad. I was crying. My back hurt so bad. And medical care in there isn't what it's supposed to be. I was supposed to be taken out to clinic every week, but I hadn't been in like 3 weeks. So when the shift commander came up, she said, have the nurses been here? What's happening? And at that point, I was bent over in a chair, just crying. And she said, no, nobody's been up here. I've called. So then she made some phone calls and a nurse came up there. And at that point, they realized that I was leaking fluid and that I was in labor. So they rushed me over to the infirmary. And they tried finding the heartbeat with one of those monitors that go on the outside of your stomach, and she couldn't find it. So at that point, I started going into hysterics. And so they called in an ambulance, and I was handcuffed and stuck in the ambulance, and an officer went with me over to Wishart Hospital. And then when we got there, they stuck me in a room. They have a DOC wing. So I was in there and I was still handcuffed and shackled. And the doctor came in and he said, I understand you're in labor. And I was crying and I'm telling him they couldn't find the heartbeat and I just knew something was wrong. And he squeezed my hand and he said, I'm gonna put in a monitor and you're gonna hear the heartbeat. And so he inserted a monitor and I could hear the heartbeat. And he said, the problem is, he said, you're having contractions every 3 minutes. He said, they're not going to be able to hear through those tightened muscles that little heartbeat. And I said, okay. And he said, you're not opening up the way you're supposed to. He said, so he said, I need to confer with your previous doctor. So I gave him that name. He was gone about 15 minutes and he come back in and he said, I want the handcuffs and shackles taken off of her. He said, we're going to go ahead and call this and do a cesarean section. So we went in, we did the C-section, and I was told that my little boy was perfect. And I was taken back to my room and I had a log chain around my ankle so I could stand up and make it to the bathroom and back to my bed with that length of chain. And I got to have Trent in there with me for a little over 24 hours before my family came to get him and I was taken back to the prison.
Was it hard to part with him?
Yeah. My dad was coming in. They had arranged to have a visit with me the very next day. At that time, I was supposed to be transferred then, and they were supposed to take Trent home. And they transferred me early. So my dad was coming in to see the baby anyway and check on him. So I was passing him, and I started crying and telling him I said, don't leave my baby. Please don't leave my baby. You gotta make sure that you take care of him. And so he started to say something to me, and the guard stood up in front of him and said, you cannot speak to her. They said that to my father. And they took me out, and I was transferred back. And I had been there probably 2 hours when they told me that I had a visit. And so they wheeled me over from the infirmary, and my dad was there, and he had Trent with him. And he said, I wanted you to see him, know that I have him, and he's not staying at the hospital without you. He said, we've got him. We're going to take care of him. So at that point, it was a little bit easier, but it still hurts, just like it happened yesterday. And he's 21 now.
Following the birth of her son, Trent, Christine began a quest to prove her innocence and be released from prison. It was a 17-year battle.
I mean, day to day, I stayed as busy as I possibly could. After I gave birth, I quit being a GED tutor, and I went into cosmetology class full-time because I could get a vocational time cut and I could get my license. So for me, I'm looking ahead of, I'm going to get into court, I'm going home. That's a viable job that I can make a lot of money and do good things. Plus, it's a time cut off the sentence. So I did that. And at the same time, I signed up for college classes through Ball State University, and I worked a job cleaning the dorm. So I made sure that literally whatever time I could be out of my room, I was out, working, studying, going to school. I received associate's and bachelor's degrees from Ball State. My associate's is an associate's of arts. My bachelor's degree is a bachelor of science, and I have an English major with minors in educational psych and anthropology.
After 2 years of incarceration, Christine Bunch's appeals appeared to be exhausted, but she found legal help within the prison from an unexpected source.
At first, when you get in there, everybody says, oh, your appeal, something's going to happen with your appeal. What most people don't know is there's not a lot that happens with appeals. The appeal is over nothing except your trial. So once that goes in, you wait. And it took almost 2 years before I got my direct appeal back. And they said that they had affirmed my conviction, but felt like charging me with arson and murder was double jeopardy. So they were vacating the arson, and I would just have the murder charge. So I think that was the first moment that I really started paying attention and kind of woke up out of the haze, because I was like, how are you going to charge me with murder without the arson on there? Can you literally just go in and rewrite the murder charge to include arson? And then you don't have to look at it like that. So I spent all my time, I was in classes most of the day, but my free time I could go to the law library and start researching. I met a woman who was at our facility because of the medical dorm. We had specialized dorms at the Indiana Women's Prison, and she was there for fraud on a bingo. Her husband was a fire chief. And so when I first started talking to her, I said, I really want to ask him some questions. So I sat down and wrote out a list of questions based off of my case, the different arson terms they had used, where I needed to go specifically to research these terms and how things have changed. And he was awesome. I mean, he told me, a V pattern means that something burnt there next to the wall and the smoke went up in a V. That's a V pattern. He said the pour patterns, he said, here's the thing. He said, they're learning now that, he said, the walkway that you use the most, when a fire happens, they'll see the imprint of that walkway. It doesn't mean that an accelerant was poured. So he put me on the right track. I filed a Freedom of Information Act in the law library to try to get the ATF report so I could see the test results. I sent off for my medical records. I started writing. I was writing hundreds of letters every week to attorneys, trying to find one that would take me on without $25,000 cash up front. And I told anybody that would listen that I was innocent and I was going to get out of there. So things started happening when the young girl that I became friends with told me that there was a woman that was writing a book about women in prison. And she said, I'm thinking if she puts you in her book, you might get some legal help. And so I started corresponding with Jennifer Furio, and she wrote the book, Letters from Prison, Voices of Women Murderers. And she told me, she said, I'll look into your case. And she said, I'll look at your letters. And she said, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to write. She said, I'm certainly not going to take your word that you're innocent. She said, you won't know until the book comes out. And I decided it was a chance I had to take. So when the book came out, the author's note before my letters begins says, if ever there's a case that makes you wonder about whether or not justice was carried out, it's this one. And so that was like the door opening. I had different students writing to me based off of those letters. And one of the girls that I was in there said, I think my attorney might start working on this. So a local attorney, Hillary Borix, said she would be willing to take my case. She looked through everything, told me she believed me. She believed I was innocent. She said, I don't know what we're going to do with this. And at that time, I was making roughly $40 a month state pay, working 2 and 3 jobs. And I sent it out to her. That was her payment. She said she would take it and work with me. So we started sending research back and forth. At that time, I had requested a bunch of things copied because I couldn't check out the National Fire Protection Agency's Manual 921 because it was reference. So I could only ask for specific things to be copied, and I had to pay for those copies. So whenever I could afford it, I would get those copies and start going through.
Eventually, the Center for Wrongful Convictions became interested in her case and asked experienced trial attorney Ron Safer to represent Christine Bunch on a pro bono basis. Safer found the original prosecutors in the case uninterested in a new scientific analysis of the case.
These prosecutors were at least relatively pleasant, but closed-minded in that they were not open to hearing literally the world's experts saying that their conclusions were wrong and baseless, but more that it could not have happened, physically could not have happened the way they said. And that gets complicated. That is based on the carboxyhemoglobin of Tony and Christine and the physics of fire. But suffice to say, it was very clear that this was an electrical fire that started in the ceiling above some ceiling tiles, and that when the tile fell to the ground, Tony died from carbon monoxide poisoning. He didn't die from the fire. He died from the fact that this was a smoldering fire caused by a faulty electrical wire in the ceiling, and he was killed by the carbon monoxide. And that is patent. It really is undeniable. Nobody has ever denied it because he had no injuries suffered in his lungs, no injuries suffered in his trachea, which would have been burnt, all of which would have been burnt had he died from the heat of the fire. But instead, he died from carbon monoxide poisoning, which would only happen in a smoldering fire. If that fire had happened the way the state said, that fire would have had to have burnt for 75 minutes in order for Tony to have gotten to that high a carboxyhemoglobin level. The entire, he and everybody else would have incinerated long before then, and he would have had massive burning in his trachea and lungs. That just didn't happen.
My understanding is Christine had a high level of carbon monoxide in her body. Is that the case?
She did. So one of the important facts of the case that nobody analyzed was what about Christine's carboxyhemoglobin level, which was reduced by the time that she got to the hospital, of course, but at the scene, she would have had an elevated carboxyhemoglobin level. So why is that? What effect does that have? That has the effect of essentially intoxicating a person. So your judgment is off, your balance is off, your coordination is off. It's interesting that at the scene of fires, sometimes when survivors are found and they're at in a hotel fire, and they're found lying by the door. And when they survive and they're interviewed afterwards, well, why didn't you just open the door? I couldn't figure out how to do it, is their response. And it's a simple door. You turn the knob. But carbon monoxide poisoning or an elevated carboxyhemoglobin level will intoxicate you, and then you can't figure out how to open the door. All of that's really important because people say, well, wait a minute, she got out. What happened when Christine saw the fire, presumably shortly after the ceiling tile fell to the ground in Tony's room, and what she saw was a small fire. And she went to try and put that out with a pillow or a blanket. But again, keep in mind, she is essentially drunk from the carbon monoxide. She is not functioning in the way that she normally would. And so that doesn't work. Then she goes to get a fire extinguisher. She can't find the fire extinguisher. By the time she returns, there is a wall of fire between her and Tony, and she goes outside to try to break the window in to get him, all of which is tragic, but there was nothing that she could do differently.
The new analysis was presented in a post-conviction relief hearing in Decatur County before the original judge who heard the case. He rejected the argument and reaffirmed Christine Bunch's conviction. The case was appealed to a 3-judge panel before the Indiana Court of Appeals. They ruled in Christina's favor and ordered she either be released or retried for murder. Local prosecutors opted not to retry the case, but prosecutors refused to say a mistake had been made or concede that she might be innocent.
I think, yes, it would have made a difference. When I first got out, if they would have just said, it's a mistake. If my prosecutor would have said that after I heard from my attorneys that he never saw that original report, if he had just said, we never saw that report and we're sorry this happened, that would have changed things. But instead, you talked to everybody you could in the fire investigation world and asked them if they would go up against the fire investigators that I had, and nobody would. So at that point, you realized you couldn't retry me. So you dismissed the charges, but you didn't dismiss them outright. You dismissed them without prejudice, and then made a statement that if at any time fire investigation changed again, you might resume pursuing these charges. At that point, I was so angry that I sought out civil attorneys and I said, I want to file suit. If you'd just left me alone, I would have struggled to rebuild my life, but I would have rebuilt it. Mm-hmm. But I felt like every chance I got, you kept doing things to take away from me. Mm-hmm. You altered that report and took 17 years of my life. I came out, instead of saying, okay, you won. We're sorry, this was a mistake. You had to push the knife in a little bit deeper. You had me preparing for a murder trial. You had me jumping through hoops. And I simply didn't want you to say, hey, we can keep walking all over her. No, I'm going to speak out. I'm going to tell people what you did. I'm going to file suit. I'm going to do interviews. I'm going to say it from the rooftops because I know after attending one innocence conference that I'm not the only person that this has happened to. I know that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands still in prisons waiting for somebody to hear their voice and recognize their truth.
Former Decatur County District Bill Smith prosecuted Christine Bunch 21 years and continues to maintain that she is guilty.
And they offered rather novel opinions, or what we call junk science, an attempt to say that this was new evidence. It was not newly discovered evidence. It was the same evidence that had always been there. It's just these hired experts, and they were paid quite a bit of money, came in and gave their opinions on evidence from that they'd never seen. They'd never examined the actual evidence. They were just relying on what the trial transcript said. I thought they were manufactured, and they were manufactured to come up with conclusions that they claimed were consistent with the evidence, and I think the rational, logical look at it would show that they were not. And that's what the trial judge found, and the post-conviction relief hearing. He did not find them as credible. Even the Court of Appeals, their issue was not whether they believed the experts. They said there was enough, quote-unquote, new evidence based upon these opinions that the case should be retried and a jury should hear it. It wasn't an exoneration. They just felt that a new trial needed to include this other evidence, which we would have refuted with our own experts, additional experts, if we'd had to.
So if it wasn't for the Northwestern Exoneration Project, do you think she would have been freed?
No. They put an extraordinary large amount of effort in it. Someone paid a lot of money to hire these experts. They had law students running around pretending to be reporters and using false pretexts to interview people. No, they had more resources than we had as a small town county prosecutor's office.
What else stands out on this case? I mean, I'm going to ask you bluntly, do you believe in Christine's innocence, or do you think there might be something to the prosecution allegation that she's never been exonerated and she's guilty of this crime?
I mean, I do believe that she's innocent. The way that she taught, I'm interested to hearing her voice, because I always find there's something in the tone of voice. But just from reading, the interactions that she had with you, and just the way that she talks about it, I really do believe that she is innocent, and that this isn't something that she has done. And she seemed to really love her son, and the way that she talks about her son and the little details, it just feels like I don't get the sense that she did it. And with the evidence, it just seems like, what she was released for seems just totally plausible. And yeah.
Well, the other thing that runs through my mind here is I sat across from her for 2.5 hours, and we just talked there in Indianapolis. And I looked her in her eyes, and I watched those tears just running down her face as she's telling the story. And I'll be honest with you, I found her absolutely captivating. I don't have the slightest doubt in my mind that she's innocent. And it just seems disappointing to me that the prosecution can't step back and say, hey, maybe a mistake was made here. Or even just say, I can't really speak to whether she's guilty or innocent, but at the very least, there's strong reasonable doubt here. I mean, if there wasn't a strong reasonable doubt, you'd think they would retry her, because they have the right to do that. And they chose not to.
Since being released from prison 5 years ago, Christine has worked to establish a stronger maternal bond with her son, Trent, who she gave birth to shortly after being imprisoned. At the time of her release, he felt torn between his grandmother, who had raised him, and his mother, who wanted to start anew. Today, Christina says her relationship with Trent is a good one. Upon her release, she initially managed a truck stop, then worked as a casino security guard, and later worked as administrative assistant to Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Today, she lives in Indianapolis and runs a foundation that helps newly exonerated individuals reintegrate into society. But she remains haunted for the 17 years she has lost and still mourns the death of her first child. And she longs to have the opportunity to raise a child to adulthood. At 45, with her prime childbearing years behind her, she knows that just may not happen.
I wanted to very much. And I spent 2 years trying before I dried up because, when you hit 40, your chances of getting pregnant are very slim. And so I went all the way through with in vitro and tore my body up and literally could not get pregnant, and was told that there are other ways. I could get donor eggs and I could still carry a baby, but that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money I spent trying to get pregnant with a sperm donor that matched, up with me and made sure that we had, compatible things so that I could try that. And the devastation every month when it didn't happen, it was hard. So it took probably a year to get over that and realize that, eventually I'm going to be a mom again, whether I come up with the money to, get donor eggs and carry a baby, or I just go through the process and find some baby out there that needs a lot of love and adopt them and bring them into my home. Either way, I want more, and I am going to have them.
Soon, Suspect Convictions will begin a new season investigating a case of someone currently serving in a prison sentence who may have been wrongly convicted. Conducting these investigations is an expensive proposition. Witnesses need to be located and interviewed. Our journalists need to travel to crime scenes and prisons. And court cases, often in distant locations, need to be attended. Production costs are significant as well. Advertising doesn't cover the cost of these worthwhile endeavors. We want to continue to investigate and bring to light cases of those who have been wrongly imprisoned. If you would like to donate, please go to gofundme.com/suspect-convictions. Again, to donate, please go to gofundme.com/suspect-convictions. Your help would be much appreciated. The address again is gofundme.com/suspect-convictions. Thank you.